The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Major news overnight, last night and overnight, on a number of fronts. Let's get caught up on everything that's going on. First and foremost, U.S. officials have now told numerous media outlets, including CNN, that the FBI has information indicating that associates of Donald Trump did indeed communicate with suspected Russian operatives to possibly coordinate the release of information damaging to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. The FBI is, again, according to U.S. officials, reviewing that information, which includes a combination of human intelligence, travel records, phone records, and business records. There's one law enforcement official who said that the information in hand suggests, quote, people connected to the campaign were in contact, and it appeared that they were giving the thumbs up to release information when it was ready. There are other U.S. officials who spoke to CNN, for example, saying it is yet premature to draw that specific an inference from the information gathered so far, since it is largely circumstantial, although not everybody agrees that this is circumstantial. I will tell you more about that in a moment. It's all starting to fall off the wall, folks. The White House didn't comment. The FBI declined to comment on this specifically so far. But in addition to these revelations, we now have Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, the committee looking, well, this is one of the places where there's an investigation going on into Trump Russia. The FBI is another place. Adam Schiff, the ranking member of the House Intel Committee that's looking into this, saying that the case for the Trump-Russia collusion is now more than circumstantial. This is huge. This is a ranking member of the committee that's investigating this and receiving the information on a day-to-day basis. And I want to be super clear here, since everything sort of becomes background noise in the era of Trump because it's scandal after scandal. Adam Schiff, who is privy to the information being reviewed, says there is now a case that is beyond circumstantial with regard to collusion and coordination of Trump and Russia. Here he is.
But you admit it's all you have right now is a circumstantial case.
Actually, no, Chuck. I can tell you that the case is more than that, and I can't go into the particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence now. So, again, I think...
So you have seen direct evidence of collusion?
I don't want to go into specifics, but I will say that there is evidence that is not circumstantial and is very much worthy of investigation. So that is what we ought to do. Now, again, I think we have been dealt a serious body blow to the credibility of our ability to get answers by today's events.
So what did he mean there, dealt a body blow by today's events? That relates to Republican Devin Nunes, and I'll get to that next. But this is on the way to an explosion, isn't it, Pat?
Right. It seems like the writers keep drawing this one out. It's like every single week there's another link in the chain here, and they keep leaving us on cliffhangers. I mean, yes, this is the guy who's the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, but he's also a Democrat. These are just words, so we'll see what evidence they come out with. But as of now, I mean, it looks like the writing's on the wall.
And what people seem to miss, there's still a contingent of people that email me and they say, David, there is no Russia story, period. I don't know. I mean, if you've not been paying attention to the news for the last 6 months, maybe that would explain thinking that there is no Russia story. But we never see a backtrack. Every time we learn something new, the process is it's denied by Trump, and then slowly we verify that at least some aspects of it are indeed true. And there's been no big moment, Pat, where the drive towards confirming collusion between Trump and Russia has been put in reverse. There's been no big moment where we say, oh, you know what? The building stories of the last 2 months, we were wrong about all of that. We just keep putting, it's drip, drip, drip.
There are plenty of things from the Trump-Russia dossier that haven't been confirmed yet.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But from what we've seen, everything that's important to the investigation, not things like the more salacious things.
Pat is mentioning that we've not proven that Donald Trump has a urine fetish. That doesn't tell us that the broader story of Trump-Russia collusion has been backtracked in any way whatsoever. We are heading towards an explosion. Now, let me get to what did Adam Schiff mean by Delta body blow by today's events? That relates to the head of the House Intel Committee, Devin Nunes, and that is what I want to talk about next. Something happened yesterday that tells us beyond any doubt that the House Intelligence Committee is not going to be the entity that conducts a full, objective, and definitive investigation into the connections and potential coordination and collusion between Donald Trump and Russian agents. Listen to this buffoonery. Republican House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes started a new controversy yesterday by saying he believes that the communications of President Donald Trump and associates may indeed have been picked up after the election by intelligence agencies conducting surveillance. Who were these intelligence agencies surveilling when they may have incidentally picked up Trump communications? Foreign targets. Now, I don't even know which aspect of this story to start with, Pat. I guess to begin with, Devin Nunes didn't go to the committee to tell them that he had received this information from who we don't know. He instead went to the White House to tell President Trump about it and to the press. Trumpists heard Devin Nunes say, hey, I've been told that intel agencies did pick up Trump communications. They heard that and they thought Trump vindicated. Obama did wiretap Donald Trump. This is a total misunderstanding, not only of the truth, but even of what Devin Nunes is alleging here. Because what Devin Nunes alleged yesterday, and still, even as of this morning, multiple members of the House Intel Committee have said, yeah, that's what Devin Nunes said, but we don't know where he got it. What he alleged is not that Trump Tower was being surveilled or that Trump associates were being surveilled, but rather that foreign targets were being surveilled. And because Trump associates were in touch with some of those foreign targets of surveillance, some of the communications were picked up, including Trump associates. This is the opposite of vindicating Trump. This is bad. This means that, as an example, imagine that U.S. intel is surveilling Russian agents, Russian targets, and they're listening to Russian communications, and all of a sudden, a Trump associate gets on the phone with one of these Russian agents. This is the opposite of Trump being wiretapped by Obama. So, number one, we don't even know if this is true, Pat. Number two, Devin Nunes, who's supposed to be investigating Trump, is going to the White House to tell Trump what information they have. And number three, even if true, it's bad for Trump.
Yeah, it really makes you question where his interest lies if he's going to go to the White House instead of his own committee first.
I'll say.
I mean, even assuming it to be true, if we take both what Ranking Member Schiff said to be true and what Devin Nunes said to be true, what's the bigger story here? That the Obama administration did something that was legal but perhaps maybe unpalatable to the American public, or that there's direct evidence that Russia colluded with the Trump campaign?
Yes.
One's an impeachable offense and one's just kind of distasteful. One
is legal surveillance, right? And again, surveillance, we could argue, is unethical on some level or not useful on some level, but again, legal surveillance. But here's where it really went bad. Again, as soon as Nunes finds out about this, he goes to the White House to personally brief Donald Trump on the revelations after talking with the press, but without having shared this information with Democrats on the House Intel Committee. The guy supposedly conducting a full, fair, and objective investigation of Trump collusion with Russia hears something and goes to the White House to disclose it to the subject of the investigation. I'm at a loss for words. This is not someone that can conduct this investigation. And even John McCain is saying we need an independent panel here.
And the press is treating this like it's a huge story because Trump seems to feel like he's vindicated over this.
Yeah.
I think all the attention should really be on what Ranking Member Schiff had to say because
Absolutely.
Both are just accusations. Both are just words at this point.
Absolutely. What Schiff had to say is the big story. And Adam Schiff also saying this is a cloud over the investigation now. This isn't going to get us a fair investigation. We need an independent committee immediately. And in addition, of course, to the FBI investigation that FBI Director James Comey confirmed is taking place, if you are going to have a House panel look into this, you have to at least pretend like it's a fair and objective investigation. And at this point, Devin Nunes cannot be the chair of such an investigation, because it's abundantly clear that he's a Trump surrogate running to Trump to tell him what they have at every opportunity. But again, you have some Trumpists who think that what Devin Nunes said vindicates Trump's baseless allegations that Barack Obama wiretapped him. It does no such thing. And I genuinely believe, Pat, that there are Trumpists who, having heard what Devin Nunes said, will actually think, oh, Obama did wiretap Trump. And that's not even what's being alleged here.
Right, because they won't keep up with the story and see if it actually gets validated and what the evidence comes out with when they're done with the investigation.
Yeah, it's always the headline, the misleading headline is what is in the minds. This is why Bowling Green Massacre from Kellyanne Conway was still probably effective propaganda and disinformation from the Trump campaign, even though it was a completely made up and fabricated terrorist attack. This stuff works, and I guarantee you, we've interviewed some of them, that there are Trumpists who think Trump was right. Obama wiretapped him. That's what Devin Nunes said yesterday. Send me your thoughts about this. I'm on Twitter at @DPacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Sean Devaney. Sean, thank you so much for signing up on our website, davidpakman.com/membership. Members not only are the top funding source for the show, but they also get the daily commercial-free audio and video streams of the show, as well as the world-famous bonus show. I recommend when you sign up, go to the March 21st bonus show, where I told what is now being infamously known as the St. Patrick's Day public urination story, a story, Pat, that people are very, very interested in.
I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Stunning story. So sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. If you want a discount, there's a coupon code, I voted 17, that you can use. I was perusing the David Pakman Show Reddit discussion forum this morning, which you can find at davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT, now home to more than 3,100 of our viewers and listeners. They're really great political discussion of social issues, economic issues, funny stuff from the show, really something for everyone. Very little trolling now because of the great job being done by the Reddit moderators, which I think is a good thing, Pat. Some people want trolling. I personally am not big on trolling. Little trolling here and there is okay, I think.
Okay, all right. Here's a few of the interesting discussions from the Reddit discussion forum. Number one, the gun industry is in a slump due to Donald Trump. Fascinating article from the Federalist pointing out that under Obama, gun sales were up because of the constant fears, irrational fears, of Obama taking your guns. However, under Trump, there are no such fears, and thus gun sales are actually down. Not great for the gun industry, interestingly enough. Very interesting post. Also from the Reddit discussion forum. What is the most constructive or appropriate way to combat Islamic terrorism? This is a post actually from one of our moderators. It has generated an interesting discussion. It is, I'm finding it at least so far, not to be an ideological discussion, but sort of a practical discussion about what is the best way to combat Islamic terrorism. Also from the Reddit discussion forum, someone saying David is right about left-wing anti-Semitism, and this has generated a big league discussion about all sorts of anti-Semitism, both left and right wing.
17 comments there.
17 comments so far, and building, I would add. Also from the Reddit discussion forum, someone asking if there's any chance of me interviewing Ben Shapiro. And I pointed out, I actually have invited Ben back on the program. I have interviewed him before. Someone posted the link to that interview, that Ben and I have not yet been able to nail anything down. And lastly from Reddit, this is funny. Someone posted, they made an image of the David Pakman Show Reddit hierarchy, and they created an image where at the top, in terms of what is most prestigious when it's posted to the David Pakman Show Reddit, this is in the view of one user, by the way, posting articles from the Associated Press or Reuters is sort of considered like the top of the hierarchy.
I thought that was the bottom, because look at the brain there. It's very small. I think as you get towards the bottom, it becomes more prestigious.
Interesting. More prestigious. Well, wow, I completely misread it. So the least prestigious thing you can do, according to this user, is post AP or Reuters articles. Next, it's Ben Shapiro videos, followed by what is described as, quote, cringe feminism, and then the most prestigious or interesting or groundbreaking types of posts to the Reddit, according to this one user, is calling David a Jew cuck on the live stream. I don't know that I agree. Now that I realize that it's flipped, I'm not sure I agree with this assessment.
Well, maybe the user didn't realize it was flipped.
Yeah.
You know, maybe he got it wrong.
But Inception, I like. You're getting into now, what did someone else think they thought when we thought about their thinking?
Yes.
And that's not a question I'm prepared to answer today. But what I can tell you is you can join the Reddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. We crack ourselves up sometimes,
we do.
Don't we? Yeah. Okay. We now have, I mean, it's almost useless to put it in these surprising terms. We now have the unsurprising confirmation that, yes, Paul Manafort, Donald Trump's former campaign manager, was involved in all sorts of sketchy stuff with Russia. There is now an exclusive report from the Associated Press. It's been revealed that Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, had a plan to benefit the Putin government and was being paid millions of dollars per year to work for the benefit of the Putin government around the world. Manafort proposed a confidential strategy as early as June 2005 that he would influence politics and business dealings and news coverage inside the US and Europe and former Soviet states to benefit the Putin government, even as US-Russia relations under then President George W. Bush were growing worse. Manafort had a $10 million annual contract starting in 2006, according to multiple interviews with people familiar with the payments to Manafort and according to business records that the Associated Press has obtained. A quote from Paul Manafort in a 2005 memo to Oleg Deripaska: "We are now of the belief that this model can greatly benefit the Putin government if employed at the correct levels with the appropriate commitment to success. The effort, quote, will be offering a great service that can refocus both internally and externally the policies of the Putin government." Manafort isn't denying these revelations. He's just arguing there's nothing nefarious here at all, which may be true in principle, except for the reality that this is the guy who was Donald Trump's campaign manager for a while until there was too much heat based on the Russia-Ukraine stuff that he was wrapped up in and he had to resign in shame. And there happened to be multiple investigations into Trump collusion with Russia. The specifics of what Manafort was doing may not in and of themselves be nefarious, but again, millions of dollars to promote Russia to the guy who ran Trump's campaign.
And these connections took place up to a decade before he jumped on Trump's campaign.
Right.
So at this point, we don't know for sure that he was conflicted by the time he signed on to the Trump team.
Sure.
But I mean, look at the Republican National Convention. They had a platform there. The one thing that the Trump team wanted to get off of that platform was that they were going to support Ukrainian missiles or weapons to fight against Russia. That was the one thing that they took issue with. So what was the connection there?
Right around the time when Manafort had to resign because the heat just got too hot with regard to his connections to Russia, was when the Republican National Committee met to talk about what is going to be their platform. You've got the Trump apparatus. He's on his way to, he's on his way to the official nomination, had already unofficially secured it during the Republican primary. They're basically fine with everything in the Republican platform, except the one bit of influence the Trump camp wants on the Republican platform is to soften the language against Russia. Stunning. The problem also, in terms of figuring out whether this is or isn't nefarious, is that it contradicts the realization that Manafort was receiving millions of dollars from Russia, contradicts prior statements from Trump's administration and from Manafort himself, both of whom previously said, oh, Manafort never worked for Russian interests. So again, even if the specifics are not nefarious, why lie? And this applies to Michael Flynn. This applies to Jeffrey Sessions, and it absolutely applies. It absolutely applies more than to anyone else, you could argue at this point, based on what's known, to Paul Manafort. Of course, the real crime here, if you ask Republicans, is Who leaked this accurate information to the Associated Press? That's all Republicans want to look at on this, Pat.
And it's funny to see Sean Spicer and the Trump administration try to distance themselves now from Paul Manafort, as if he didn't play a major role in Trump's campaign. He was the campaign manager for March to April, or March to August. That's a crucial time.
Yeah, it was either earlier this week or maybe late last week, where Sean Spicer started sort of like a Paul Who type of campaign, where whenever Paul Manafort's name would be brought up, he would take the approach of, Paul Manafort, who was that guy again? Oh, yeah, Paul, right. Very minor figure during the entire campaign. And that made me think there must be something big coming about Paul Manafort if they're completely inaccurately saying, yeah, he wasn't really a player in our campaign. And indeed, days later, this bombshell from the Associated Press comes out that he was on a $10 million a year contract.
Pretty soon they'll forget who Michael Flynn was, the disgraced national security advisor.
He had a minor role in national security. I mean, yes, he was officially the national security advisor, but, it's not like Trump was calling him at 3 a.m. for questions about national security. He was calling him at 3 a.m. for questions about the currency value of the United States dollar. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's administration is the subject of an FBI investigation into possible collusion with Russia. We've got Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, resigns in shame after lying about his conversations with Russian officials, revealed to have been a foreign agent lobbying for Turkey. Jeff Sessions, Trump's attorney general, lied about meetings with Russian officials. We still don't even know what the bottom line is there. It's bad. And then a Trump former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, is a seemingly illegal unregistered foreign agent of the Russian government who is trying to influence U.S. policy. We have moved from smoke to fire here, haven't we? Isn't it fair to say that at this point?
I would think so, especially with Ranking Member Schiff on the House Intelligence Committee saying that there is evidence, direct evidence, that Russia and the Trump team colluded.
More than circumstantial. And circumstantial is enough to trigger an investigation, but Adam Schiff now saying more than circumstantial. Let's talk about filling the swamp. Oh, I'm sorry, it's supposed to be draining the swamp, but it's actually getting filled, not drained. Contrary to what Donald Trump promised time and again during his campaign, he continues to fill the swamp. Trump is filling top positions at the Departments of Defense, Homeland Security, and the State Department with defense contractors and their lobbyists, people from companies who are paid to manufacture things like weapons and vehicles for the U.S. government. This is the heart of that term made famous by President Dwight Eisenhower, the military-industrial complex. Those at the heart of the military-industrial complex are making themselves or are being made official parts of Trump's administration. Not only is it a clear conflict of interest, which is par for the course with Trump, par for the course has a whole new meaning actually now that we know that how much Donald Trump is playing golf. It's almost funny to use that term, par for the course, when talking about Trump.
I wonder how good he is at golf. It doesn't strike me as much of a golfer.
I heard he's terrible. Yeah, I heard he's terrible. We've got Ivanka in the White House. We've got the Exxon CEO and friend of Russia, Rex Tillerson, in the State Department. And the White House announced just a couple of days ago that Donald Trump has appointed, let's just go through the list. Benjamin Cassidy is now the Secretary of Legislative Affairs at the State Department. Cassidy was a senior executive at Boeing, recipient of huge big league government contracts. Donald Trump has named Jonathan Rath Hoffman as the Department of Homeland Security's Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs. Where did he previously work? The Chertoff Group. That's the Homeland Security consulting firm, connected, by the way, to Michael Chertoff, Bush administration official, responsible for getting the Department of Homeland Security to put in those really expensive porno scanners that the TSA uses in airports. Pat Shanahan. It's been a while since I said porno scanner. It is. Sometimes I crack myself up. Pat Shanahan was appointed by Donald Trump as Deputy Secretary of Defense. Shanahan was a vice president at Boeing who ran none other than the company's missile building division, a business executive with no government or military experience. The nominee for Trump's Deputy Secretary of DHS is Elaine Duke, who consulted for a number of defense contractors, including the Columbia Group, which manufactures these things called unmanned drones. And then you have Heather Wilson, who's been nominated to be the head of the Air Force, a former Lockheed Martin consultant. She was in charge of maintaining Lockheed's $2.4 billion a year contract to build and research nuclear weapons and keep the contract closed to competition. This is just a sampling There's actually a minimum of 15 officials with financial ties to defense contractors who have now either been nominated or appointed by Trump to some of these positions in Washington. Some people might not realize that Secretary of Defense Mattis and Secretary of Homeland Security Kelly, who were primarily paid by defense firms, their background, Mattis is associated with the military, but also someone who was paid by defense firms before joining their cabinet level positions. So I don't know what it means to drain the swamp, Pat, but I'm pretty sure that this isn't draining the swamp.
It's a revolving door. It sure is. I mean, I think most Trump supporters look the other way, though, because they think, well, there's not politicians in these major roles now. It's people like the financiers, the oil tycoons, the people who actually are in the military-industrial complex. So they see that as an improvement.
Trump is actually calling for a budget that would make perfect sense if you're filling the swamp with these types of people. Trump is calling for $54 billion in added military spending next year, a $30 billion budget increase for the DOD and DHS for this fiscal year. And guess what? Roughly half of that $30 billion is planned to be spent on new military equipment. Trump was going to drain the swamp, crack down on the lobbyists. Not only isn't he doing that, the lobbyists are joining government. I would love to just have a Trumpist call in and explain to me how the revolving door is revolving so fast that it's flying off of its hinges, and the swamp is overflowing with the lobbyists Trump said wouldn't be part of his administration. You can discuss this with us on our Reddit discussion forum, davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Next, the conclusion to my interview with the great Lawrence Krauss.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're continuing the conversation we started yesterday with theoretical physicist and cosmologist Lawrence Krauss. The new book is the greatest story ever told so far. In one of the interviews I read that you did around this interview, you sort of drew a distinction in terms of why questions and how questions. And you were critical in one sense of religion, not because it necessarily gets why questions wrong, which I'm sure you probably believe based on our past conversations, but because you think that the why questions are less useful to us than the how questions. Let's start there. Why do you think that?
It's not that they're less useful. They're usually less well defined. In fact, often they're meaningless. Because when you ask a why question, it presumes purpose. Why are we here? Well, it presumes that there's some purpose for us to be here. What if there's no purpose? I would argue that almost all the time when we say why, we really mean how. Why is the sky blue? It's not, we don't think there's a purpose for that, but we can explain why that's happened. Why do I have to breathe to survive? All of those things. And so those why questions that really are why questions often presume purpose. That's what why means. And those may have no significance whatsoever at all. For example, if there is no purpose to the universe, then the why part of why are we here is literally meaningless.
Well,
so
wouldn't it be meaningful in the sense that to the individual, whatever the answer is, and maybe the answer is we don't know why or there is no reason why, it still seems like it would be very meaningful to individuals living their lives on the planet.
Well, you're right, but I guess for many people, the answer to the why are we here, saying there is no reason, may not seem that satisfying. But we can nevertheless say, okay, there is no reason why we're here, but that doesn't mean that your life has no purpose. If you ask why am I doing what I'm doing, or why is the world the way it is, we can talk about humanity because we have intent and we have consciousness, and so extracting that from the universe doesn't mean that, as I say, our own life doesn't have purpose and meaning. But I think we have to accept that the answer to the question, why are we here, could be, as I've argued, in fact likely is, that it's an accident. There's no fundamental existential reason why we happen to live on Earth and are here to enjoy or not enjoy our lives and to survive as a species or not survive as a species. No one is in control but us.
Are you, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this question. Are you, in thinking about the human exploration of both the how and why questions, are you concerned with the increased seeming malleability of what we know of as truth, facts, and reality that's happening because of the political situation in the United States? I think I'm sort of getting through the core question here. What's your view of how science and epistemology and so many of these issues are increasingly being treated by the political establishment that's in power?
Well, that's a real problem, and that's why I think my story, which is somewhat esoteric, it's about the forefronts of what we know, and it takes readers from their personal experience out to that edge, and I think it's a fascinating story. But it has a moral that science, the process of science, can overcome the biases and prejudices of individual scientists to cut through the illusions, and that same process is essential for the proper functioning of a democracy. One of the real problems is we view science as a set of facts, because often it's been taught in school that way. That's not what it is. It's a process for deriving facts. It's a process for telling sense from nonsense by skeptical inquiry, the use of empirical data and many sources to check it, and testing ideas after you have them. All of those things are an essential part of what we should be doing in the public arena, how we should be forming public policy, and how the public should be examining and judging their leaders. So I think it stems in some sense from an educational system which was based on a time when school was just a bunch of facts. But now I can get, I have my phone here. I can get more information on my phone than I could get in any school, but I get more information. And what we have to do is train people to be their own filters. And right now, we don't do that well enough. And I think the lesson of science is that we can use that scientific method, and we need to use that scientific method, not to use science to decide how to live, but to use science as a tool to make public policy more rational and to allow voters, in some sense, to become more informed. It's a huge problem right now, and the only way to tell that I can see to tell the information from the misinformation on the internet is to have that filter, and starting to have that filter is something that it's difficult to develop late in life, and we need to sort of input it into our educational system more effectively. And that means teaching science, not just the scientific method, but teaching science as more questioning than answering. Asking good questions is a key part of it, and not knowing always the answer. You said earlier, maybe is it okay to say we don't know? And is that acceptable? And of course it's acceptable. We should be willing to say we don't know how the universe works at all levels. We don't know the answers. More parents, more teachers should be willing to say that, but accompany that by saying, let's figure out how we might find out, and make it a journey, and often a joyous journey, to discover the truth.
Do you think that it's possible that the reason that sometimes certain aspects of certain scientific questions become so politicized and there's a fear around what science may tell us would be, that there are some who believe that once we have the scientific consensus on a particular issue, that it definitively presumes what public policy should be? And I guess to put a specific example to it, maybe the reason that we see climate science skepticism to the degree that we do is that there are some climate skeptics who assume that if we agree that humans are having an impact on our climate, that the political repercussions of that are definite, when in reality, having the science should just be the starting point. You can still have a debate over what the policy should be. I don't know. It seems like maybe this is an aspect of what's going on.
You've answered exactly what I would say. Science doesn't make the policy. Look, you can decide, okay, humans are affecting climate, but you know what? For this reason or that reason, this political or economic reason, we feel we can't deal with it. That's policy. I would hope it's not acceptable policy, but that's to be debated. but you can't have a rational debate about what the policy should be until you accept the reality that these changes are happening. And then you can say, look, we have more urgent needs at home. We can't afford this to invest in energy sources which will make us more sustainable in the long run. And in fact, then have the discussion of what the cost-benefit analysis is of investing in those things now versus later. But you can't even get to that important second stage of policy making without the first recognition that this is a reality. And reality, as my favorite one of my favorite science fiction writers, Philip K. Dick, once said, reality is that which continues to exist even when you stop believing in it. And I think we have to recognize that you are allowed to invent your own realities and apparently win elections. But in the long run, reality comes back and bites you in the butt.
Well, I think there are obvious ways that when you win an election and you invent your own reality, this could be scrubbing scientific climate data that's been collected over decades, or requiring approval before new data can be released on certain subjects by government agencies, as we've seen. Those are sort of obvious and noticeable ways that a political apparatus can create a reality. But what are some of the maybe less visible ways in which this anti-science perspective can be dangerous that the average person might not hear about in the news?
Well, I think one of the more dangerous ways is to propagate inaccuracies and continue to propagate them with impunity, first of all. Secondly, is to attack the educational system, which in some sense you're seeing happening, so that the kind of rigorous thinking and skeptical analysis that we should be training students to do is missing. And the other is reducing funding in general for the kind of programs that are essential for us to get the kind of data we need to make sensible policies. Heralding going to Mars and spending $20 billion to send a bunch of people to prancer on Mars, but not mentioning the fact that you're going to kill NASA's all of the program that studies the evolution of climate on Earth, which is so essential for also protecting us from storms, that sort of thing. Cutting, and in fact, I just wrote a piece about this. Look, the current budget cuts $900 million from the agency that is the dominant agency supporting physical science research in this country. That's 20% of the budget. It's responsible for all of the stuff I talk about in The Greatest Story Ever Told so far. Cutting the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and the Institute for Museums and Libraries. You add all that up, that's $1.6 billion. At the same time, the budget adds $2 billion as a down payment on a wall. And you've got to ask yourself the question, which is better for the health and future of the nation? Killing science and culture and those things that get people thinking about the world around them to defend us from a potential but largely non-existent immigrant horde? As I love to say, using the quote from the physicist Robert W. Wilson, who was the first director of the Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, he was asked by Congress, will building that aid in the defense of the nation? But he said, no, but it'll help keep the nation worth defending. And I think as we look at these attacks on science and culture, we're seeing effectively an administration that is disempowering the public from being able to effectively and rationally control their future.
We've been speaking, partially at least, about the new book by Lawrence Krauss, The Greatest Story Ever Told so far. It's always so great to have you on. Thank you.
Well, it's great, and I don't mind that we made the segue, because these understandings of the universe at the forefront and the process by which we get there does have important implications for understanding ourselves in everyday life, and that's why I think that you are connected. That's why I hope people will also look at the book who are interested in both problems.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I think you're going to be proud of me for what I'm about to tell you. I was really, really close to coming to you today with a positive story from the Trump administration, something good that Donald Trump had done that I could tell you about. The story was going to be how great it was that Donald Trump signed a NASA funding bill, and he's added human exploration of Mars to NASA's mission, because that's how the story has been reported by some media outlets. How great. Unfortunately, it is not actually the positive story I planned to come to you with. The new law does authorize $19.5 billion in spending for NASA. But as Elon Musk has astutely pointed out on Twitter, this basically does nothing. It just reauthorizes existing programs. Elon Musk tweeting recently, this bill changes almost nothing about what NASA is doing. Existing programs stay in place, and there is no added funding for Mars. Elon Musk is completely correct. Not only is Elon Musk correct, though, this is an authorization. It doesn't actually provide the funding that comes from appropriations committees. And secondly, despite reports, what Trump signed does nothing to add to Mars funding. Much of the general news coverage after Trump signed this focused on, the legislation calls for sending humans to Mars. Like, for example, the Associated Press headlined its story, Trump signs bill authorizing NASA funding, Mars exploration. According to sources at Ars Technica, according to sources that Ars Technica has spoken to, this would be something that actually does not have any interest within the Trump administration. More than likely, this entire thing, along with the signing session that you can see in this picture here and the jokes and the pandering, it was all to distract from the areas of science that actually are having their funding cut in Trump's proposed budget. This includes the National Institutes of Health and so much else. And while the White House has directed NASA to no longer study Earth climate issues, you could actually make a pretty strong case that Trump's relationship with NASA is a disastrous one, not the one made to appear to be really great by this picture with all these people who are smiling.
Is it possible, though, that Elon Musk is trying to downplay this signing because he operates SpaceX, which is in ways is a competitor to NASA? So maybe he has his own financial interests in trying to make this seem like no big deal?
Brilliant question. Wrong. No, I mean, it's a good point, but SpaceX is working with the U.S. government on a lot of these contracts, and increasingly because of changes that have been made to the NASA space program, SpaceX and I believe also Boeing have gotten some contracts to do some of the work that NASA would have been presumed to have done. So
it's like a public-private partnership.
Exactly. So conceptually, what you're saying, your skepticism is absolutely warranted. It doesn't actually appear to be the case in this particular incident. But I like the skepticism, Pat. I like it. But the real red alert here is NASA has been directed by the White House to no longer study Earth climate issues, which is a big effing deal. And that's actually, that's the big NASA story from my point of view under the Trump administration, that they're now no longer allowed to study Earth climate issues, which of course relates to the Trump position on climate change and destroying our environment with fossil fuels.
Well, if you were looking for a silver lining in this story,
Please.
Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio were in that room when Trump authorized that bill,
Yeah.
and they had to suck up to the president completely. You know, that was great to watch. I
think there's a bigger silver lining. By being in the room with Trump while he was signing this, they weren't elsewhere doing more damage.
Okay.
Maybe that's a silver lining that we can find from this entire NASA charade. As we've been talking about, this probably comes as no surprise to you, FBI Director James Comey has officially confirmed that the FBI is investigating Donald Trump campaign connections to Russia and Russian interference with the 2016 election. That's not news at this point, okay? What I have not yet discussed with you, and I'm going to do right now, is that we've also found out that the FBI appears to be investigating right-wing propaganda news websites Breitbart and InfoWars. InfoWars, of course, the right-wing conspiracy website of Alex Jones. Earlier this week, anonymous FBI sources told the news website McClatchy that the 2016 presidential election led to automated or saw automated Russian computers strategically posting pro-Trump news articles from InfoWars, from Alex Jones's program, and from Breitbart, during times in the campaign where things were not looking so great for Donald Trump, and the FBI is reportedly looking into whether Breitbart and InfoWars were directly coordinating with Russian operatives in promoting their stories. The Russian computers were mostly posting the articles to Twitter and Facebook, and a great deal of the articles contained falsehoods, not surprisingly. I think most rational people, when you hear about articles from Breitbart and InfoWars being posted by Russia to the internet, most reasonable people would assume that there were falsehoods in some of those articles. But for the bots to be posting the articles to social media, the question is, would participation be required by Breitbart and InfoWars? The answer is no, but that's exactly what the FBI Counterintel Division is looking into. They're trying to figure out, was there communication or some degree of collusion between InfoWars and Breitbart and Russia as all of this went on? And we know, Pat, that Breitbart and InfoWars were not only big proponents of Trump, they were also constantly defending and taking the side of Russia, much the way that Trump has done. So it's sort of, it's very interesting that this is going on. It's not conclusive yet, but it's also pretty obvious that this would be something to take a look at.
I really wonder how Alex Jones will respond to this, because it kind of plays into his narrative that the government's trying to crack down on him and silence him.
Yeah.
And he hasn't been able to really go after the government much as of late because he's still on the Trump train.
Right.
But if there's an independent agency like the FBI, he can still kind of do that because, of course, they're also investigating the president.
You're still calling the FBI independent. I noticed that.
It's like, it's not completely
I know what you
independent,
mean.
but if they're able to do an investigation against the president, there is some independence there.
You would think so, yeah. Now, whether they are making some decisions for political purposes, I guess is different from whether they're presumably independent. So as of this morning, as far as who's commented, the White House, Breitbart, InfoWars, and the FBI have all declined to comment on this for the time being. You would think, though, and this I think gets to Pat's point, you would think that if Breitbart and InfoWars had not been coordinating with Russia, wouldn't they have issued some full-throated denials so far? And again, if they have in the last 2 hours, then I take this back. But as of 2 hours ago, at least, when I last researched the story, they hadn't. And in the same manner, you can apply the same logic to the Trump-Russia thing. If Trump and Russia hadn't had anything to do with each other, you wouldn't expect to see constant lying from Trump officials, Flynn, Manafort, Trump himself, seemingly, Jeff Sessions, about connections to Russia. Why lie if there really is nothing to hide? I've not gotten a good explanation for that so far.
And if they don't lie outright, they give these very lawyerly answers.
Yeah, I think that there's going to end up being very simple answers to these questions, and they're going to be so simple that they're going to expose why the people lying were lying all along. That's my prediction, and we'll see. We have a voicemail number. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. We heard from, this is the Eggman today, right? This
Yes.
is let's take a listen to what the Eggman had to say.
Hi, Dave. I feel like FBI Director James Comey and Vice President Mike Pence are involved in a conspiracy to make Mike Pence president. Comey is just saying to Pence on their secret burner phone, just a little bit longer, Mike. Just a little bit longer, Mike, and I'll get you there. I told you, Mike, play the long game, and you've got it.
Yeah, listen, it's a nice little hypothesis that the Eggman has cooked up there for us. My sort of concern about whether this is what's going on would be not that there might not be something like this going on, but that if Donald Trump is revealed to have come to power based on collusion with Russia, it's Trump-Pence, right? I don't know that Pence would be exempt from whatever is determined as having happened with Trump and Russia. It would have been to get the Trump-Pence ticket in the White House. So I don't necessarily believe that Pence would be immune from the repercussions.
I think you would need to find evidence that Pence was involved, though. And also, I think he only joined the Trump campaign in July, so maybe there was less influence there.
Yeah, less, but not none. I think that's pretty clear.
I really wonder how Pence is feeling right now, though. Is he excited? He could become the next president pretty easily.
If maybe Paul Ryan is the one who's excited about being the next president of the United States. I don't know, but interesting hypothesis from the Eggman. On the bonus show today, Sesame Street is introducing a Muppet with autism. We will talk about that. Basketball player Shaquille O'Neal apparently believes the Earth is flat, And Boston, a particular school here in Boston, has changed the world map that they're now using in geography classes. It's confusing to some students, but it's actually a really, really interesting topic that I have some thoughts on and I want to dig into on the bonus show. So we've got a great bonus show planned for you today. DavidPakman.com/membership to sign up. Coupon code IVoted17 is available. We will speak to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.